Hey, the bold and the beautiful, it's Radhika from Radhika's Storyline, and we're going to talk about the bold and the beautiful. But first, please hit subscribe if you're not already following us. So, this week on The Bold and the Beautiful, we're looking at spoilers for Monday, July 20th through Friday, July 24th, and wow, this is one of those classic B&B weeks where people act like they are fighting over business, but really they are fighting over pride, old grudges, family loyalty, and the eternal need to be right louder than the next person. And honestly, that is when this show is at its messiest and most entertaining because once these people get rolling, nobody knows how to have a small argument. Everything becomes a dynasty crisis, a public spectacle, or a personal insult that somehow echoes through 3 generations. So, the big umbrella over all of this is the war between the House of Logan and Forrester Creations, which already sounds dramatic enough before anybody even opens their mouth. And, of course, Eric, being Eric, decides not to keep this behind closed doors. No, he goes public with the beef, or more public, because as the raw spoilers themselves basically point out, the world already knew about it. And that is what makes this so funny to me. They are acting like some shocking expose is happening, when really it sounds more like everybody is just taking turns using a bigger microphone. Which, honestly, is very on brand for these families. And during this explosive TV interview, Eric accuses Katie and company of stealing thunder that apparently Forrester had the exclusive rights to, and I have to say, the phrase itself tells you everything about the vibe of the week. This is not calm corporate disagreement. This is ego. This is public posturing. This is the fashion world version of someone standing in the middle of the room yelling, "How dare you breathe my air?" And honestly, when Eric gets fired up, he can still command a room, so I am sure the interview will have that larger-than-life quality. But at the same time, I totally get why Katie and Hope respond with eye rolls, because from their point of view this probably sounds theatrical, self-important, and just a little ridiculous. And then later, Brooke reminds Katie that she started the fight, and honestly, that little quoted remind is doing a lot of work for me. Because that tells you this is not a simple sisterly reality check. This is one of those moments where somebody frames history in the most convenient possible way, then delivers it with a straight face, as if they are the voice of reason. Sure, Brooke. Sure. That is exactly how family feuds work, with one clean culprit and everyone else acting like saints. I mean, come on. 2 sisters working in the same orbit were never going to glide through this without sparks. And the whole idea that one woman started all of it while everybody else just innocently wandered into chaos is honestly very selective memory. So, right there, before we even get to the physical part of the week, the emotional foundation is already cracked. Eric is escalating in public. Katie and Hope are clearly unimpressed. Brooke is stepping in with that classic mix of sisterly concern and not-so-subtle blame. And you can feel the show laying out this larger theme that everybody wants to claim moral high ground while simultaneously throwing stones from very expensive glass houses. That hypocrisy is half the drama. These people do not just fight, they fight while insisting their version of fighting is somehow classier, more justified, or more noble than everybody else's. And honestly, that is why family wars on this show never die. Nobody can just admit, yeah, I'm being petty. Now, the real gasoline gets poured on the fire with Will and Elektra, because despite that sad little staring at the moon ending from Friday, these two apparently are not completely over. And I have to say, that is so soap, right? One minute it is moody silence and wounded eyes under the night sky, and the next minute somebody is already staking a claim like the breakup memo was never officially filed. And in this case, the spoiler says the increasingly temperamental Spencer heir is about to declare that his on-again, off-again girlfriend is going with him. Not ask, not hope, declare. Which tells you immediately that Will is entering this week in full hothead mode. And honestly, anytime a young Spencer starts getting possessive and impulsive, you can hear the warning bells. That family line is practically genetically engineered for big gestures, entitlement, and emotional overreaction. So if Will is deciding Elektra is going with him, that does not sound romantic to me. It sounds controlling, agitated, and maybe a little unglued. And I think that is important because it sets up why this whole thing tips over from family sniping into something physical. So then Eric intervenes, and you just know that was never going to go smoothly. Because Eric is not going to stand there and let some younger guy steamroll a situation, especially not a Spencer, and especially not when tensions are already this high. He is going to step in. He is going to lay down the law. And honestly, in another context that might have cooled things off. But not here. Not with Will already simmering. Not with all this Logan Forrester Spencer baggage floating around like static in the air. And then Will gets insulting and calls Eric old man, which, wow, rookie mistake. Massive mistake. Nobody calls the Forrester patriarch old man and expects that room to settle down. That is not just disrespectful. That is basically a challenge. It is the kind of insult that instantly stops being about the original issue and becomes about dignity, status, and who thinks they can get away with what. And honestly, if Will was trying to prove that he is immature, reckless, and spoiling for a fight, there it is. And of course RJ gets involved, because this show never sees a tense confrontation and thinks, maybe let's keep the number of participants low. No, we have to add another emotional stakeholder right into the mix. And you can already picture how much calmer that makes everything, which is to say not calm at all. If Eric is being insulted and RJ steps in, now the situation stops being one guy mouthing off and turns into a family loyalty showdown. At that point, fists flying almost feels inevitable, which is awful and yet, let's be honest, completely in character for this kind of soap war. And then we get the upshot of the face-off, which is the real shocker. Eric ends up sporting a shiner from his first bar fight in decades. I mean, wow. That image alone is enough to sell the week. Eric Forrester, public face of Dynasty elegance, suddenly looking like he wandered out of a very chaotic side street brawl. It is absurd. It is dramatic. It is kind of amazing. And honestly, part of me loves it because it takes all the high-minded business war talk and strips it down to what it really is underneath. Bruised egos, bruised bodies, and people completely losing the plot. And then Katie is weeping to her former friend that she is sorry. Oh, so sorry, which is such an interesting turn because it raises the immediate question of what exactly she thinks she is apologizing for. Is she sorry the fight escalated this far? Is she sorry Eric got hurt? Is she sorry the whole feud turned into a disaster? Or is this one of those emotional B&B apologies where the tears are real, but the larger conflict is absolutely not over? Because that is the thing. In soaps, somebody crying, "I'm sorry," does not always mean peace is breaking out. Sometimes it just means one moment hit harder than expected. And I actually think that is what makes this week especially juicy. On the surface, you could read Katie's tears as a possible turning point, like maybe the war is about to wind down before it fully explodes. But the raw material itself is basically side-eyeing that idea and saying no, maybe let this make things worse. And honestly, I agree. Hate to say it, but from a drama perspective, if a black eye and one crying apology wrapped everything up, that would be way too neat. This is the bold and the beautiful. Families do not put away years of rivalry because somebody got punched once. If anything, they usually use that punch as new evidence in an even bigger case. And then we get that delicious little hypocrisy note because now everybody is apparently judging Will for hitting RJ, while conveniently forgetting that Ridge slugged Bill and somehow life went on, and Brooke slapping Katie also did not exactly get treated like the end of civilization. And honestly, this is the part where the show is really calling out its own characters in the best way. These people love standards. They just do not love applying the same standard twice. If an older Forrester lashes out, that is passion. If Brooke crosses a line, that is emotion. But if Will does it, now we are acting like he needs a handbook and a full disciplinary board. And listen, maybe he does need a handbook, but so does half this cast. So, taken as a whole, the recap of the week feels like a slow build from public business, sniping into private family chaos, and finally into outright physical fallout. Eric escalates the feud on television. Katie and Hope basically think, here we go again. Brooke adds blame into the family stew. Will and Electra clearly are not done. Will gets controlling. Eric steps in. Will gets nasty. RJ jumps in. And then bam, somebody is literally wearing the consequences on his face. It is messy, it is petty, It is emotional, and honestly, it is exactly the kind of over-the-top family collision that B&B does very well when it remembers that these people are at their best when they are both glamorous and completely berserk. Now, let's talk theories because this is where I think the week gets even more interesting. First up, I absolutely suspect Eric going public is going to backfire, even if he thinks he is taking control of the narrative. And the reason I say that is simple. Once you make a family business feud public on television, you are no longer just speaking to your rivals. You are performing for the audience, for the market, for your own family, and for your own pride. That changes everything. It is not a stretch to think that Eric believes he is defending Forrester's reputation, but I could easily see his interview making the whole situation look even uglier. Because now the beef is not just whispered through offices and living rooms. Now it has spectacle. Now everyone has to react. And honestly, Katie and Hope's eye rolls tell me they are not rattled in the way Eric probably wants them to be. If anything, they may see his interview as proof that he is emotional, territorial, and trying too hard to claim ownership over something that maybe does not belong to him alone. So, I am betting Eric's public move energizes the other side instead of silencing them. Public attacks do that. They force people to harden their position. Nobody wants to look weak after being called out on TV. So I could see this interview becoming less of a mic drop and more of a catalyst, the very thing that pushes the conflict into a nastier phase. And I mean, let's be real, Eric accusing Katie and company of stealing thunder already sounds like the kind of phrase that would annoy people more than intimidate them. It is dramatic, yes, but it is also so loaded with ego that I would not be surprised if the Logans walk away thinking, wow, thank you for proving our point. That is why I think the interview matters. Not because it settles anything, but because it exposes how personal this has become. This is no longer a strategic disagreement. It is wounded identity in couture. Next, I am betting Brooke's little reminder to Katie that she started the fight is going to land badly, even if Brooke thinks she is being honest. And honestly, when sisters are already in conflict, let me remind you is about the last phrase you should open with. That is not de-escalation language. That is courtroom language. That is, I have assigned blame, and now I need you to sit there and accept my version of events language. So I wonder if Brooke is trying to help and only makes Katie feel more cornered, more judged, and more resentful. And if that is the case, then Katie's later tears become even more layered. Because maybe she is not just grieving the external mess. Maybe she is also carrying the internal exhaustion of being blamed, pushed, and emotionally worn down by people who claim they want peace. That happens all the time in family dramas. The person who cries is not always the person who thinks they are wrong. Sometimes they are just the person who has hit their limit. So I suspect Brooke's attempt to frame the story may actually inflame the personal side of the Logan conflict rather than calm it. And, there is also the possibility that Brooke's comment is the show quietly underlining the bigger issue here, which is that everyone in this feud is rewriting history in real time. That is one of my favorite soap habits, honestly. Everybody remembers every slap, betrayal, and insult, but only the version that makes them look the most justified. So Brooke saying Katie started it may not just be a sister jab. It may be the week's clearest example of how truth in this war is becoming completely subjective. Another possibility is that Will is not just having a bad moment. I think there is a real chance the show is signaling that his temper is becoming the bigger problem, the thing that could outgrow the Electra situation and infect everything around him. And I say that because the spoiler does not describe him as merely upset. It specifically leans into him being increasingly temperamental, and then immediately gives us a sequence where he declares, insults, escalates, and ends in violence. That is a pattern. So I wonder if the black eye fallout is not only about one fight, but about everybody finally having to confront the fact that Will is spinning out. And if that is where this is headed, then honestly, the Spencer angle becomes just as important as the Logan Forrester angle. Because then the question is not only who punched whom, but who is going to reign in Will if he keeps acting like this? I could see characters reacting very differently depending on which family lens they are using. The Forresters may view him as a reckless threat. The Logans may see him as proof this war is poisoning everything. And the Spencers, well, they may be tempted to excuse him the way these families always excuse their own. That is where the hypocrisy note becomes so juicy. Once a younger guy throws a punch, everyone suddenly discovers principles. Fascinating timing. And honestly, I am betting the old man, insult is going to have consequences beyond the physical altercation. That kind of line sticks. You do not disrespect Eric Forrester like that, and then just move on to coffee. Even if the punch itself becomes the headline, that insult is what makes the whole confrontation feel generational. It is not just anger. It is the younger heir openly dismissing the old guard. And on a show built around legacy families, that matters. I could see Eric taking that more personally than the bruise, because bruises fade. Disrespect becomes a story. Now, here is another one. I suspect RJ getting involved is going to complicate the aftermath more than the actual fight itself. Because once he steps in, the event stops being a one-on-one flashpoint and becomes a larger family incident. There is a witness, a defender, another emotional participant. That means there are now multiple competing versions of what happened, who started it, who crossed the line first, and who is trying to protect whom. And that, honestly, is catnip for soap writing. Nobody will agree on the facts because agreeing on the facts would end the argument too soon. And because the spoilers specifically mention people acting like, well, should be fired for hitting RJ, I think the fallout could quickly shift from personal outrage to consequences, blame, and selective justice. I wonder if what happens next is not just about condemning violence but about weaponizing it. One side may use the incident to make a moral case. The other side may point to past violence and call foul on the double standard. And just like that, instead of one punch ending the war, the punch becomes evidence in the next round of it. And I mean, let me know what you think, but that feels much more likely to me than an easy truce. Because if everyone is already calling out hypocrisy, then the story is not moving toward closure. It is moving toward scorekeeping. And scorekeeping is how these feuds survive forever.